for all that we are doing and all that we will do as a city. We are also a city held back, unable to live up to our full potential due to the enormous, systemic financial challenges we have struggled with for decades, and even greater financial challenges we face going forward.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel.
Jeff Berkowitz in Chicago here on August 30, 2019. Some of you folks will see it a little later on cable, but we're almost out of the dog days of August, right, Terry?
It's hard to believe how fast this year has gone by, and it's been an amazing year so far politically, and we continue to have interesting things happening that you and I will be discussing and updating the audience with. And Jeff, as we record this on August 30th, last night, Mayor Lori Lightfoot delivered her State of the City address, her first ever, and she's given some very dire warnings to the people about what's happening with the finances, and she said they're worse than they thought they were. Why don't we take a listen and we can discuss it on the back end.
When I started as mayor on May 20th, we walked into a projected deficit for next year of $1 billion. Yes, that's billion with a B. And as a result of the efforts we have made to date and changes in our forecasting, that number has decreased by almost $200 million. But that still means that the budget gap for 2020 is $838 million. And if $838 million sounds like it's big, it's because it is. It's the largest in our recent history. A third of that gap comes from increased pension costs. Another third, increased labor costs. And nearly $100 million comes from increases in servicing our debt, and $90 million comes from anticipated lawsuits. And nearly $100 million comes from a variety of other costs. To put this in perspective, folks, for every dollar you pay to the city, 80 cents goes to pay for the cost of personnel and benefits along with pensions.
Well, it's a focused speech. You got to say that. There was a lot of buildup for people around Illinois who are not in Chicago. They may not realize. I think that was the first ever televised, budget speech of that type. Even though the mayor said it wasn't a budget speech, it was sort of. Anyway, the first ever televised live in Chicago. On NBC, ABC, CBS, the local networks, local Fox, GTW. Who did I leave out? WGN. So it's a big deal. And were people listening? I don't know. Didn't hear the ratings. I know the Cubs were on Channel 7. I'm sure many more people were watching the Cubs. But the short of it is, it's a pretty good speech. She got out the number, $1 billion, you heard. She started, that was the gift that Rahm Emanuel left her. He left her $1 billion in the hole, and she claims she almost got 200 million. She might have been more precise. She caught somewhere 162 billion. So now she has a hole. We have a hole, people in Chicago, of $838 million. That means next year budget, they either got to get revenue somewhere to balance it, they got to cut spending. It'd be nice if they would say, what reforms could we have that would lower spending? It's not a cut. There's a difference in a reform where you get efficiency, you do things better, okay, and your spending goes down.
Jeff, I think what's clear is that Chicago is between a rock and a hard place, and Lori Lightfoot is looking for a way to get out of this hole, and there's not a lot of good answers. I mean, she said, among other things, she's going to be looking to have a thriving marijuana industry, but even if that's the case, that's going to take some years to develop. She's facing an $800 million budget hole right now. She said, to her credit, and let's if we take her numbers, that they started off with $1 billion. She's cut that down by $200 million, so it's $800 and something million left she has to fill. There's talk that she's going to throw herself and the city of Chicago on the mercy of the legislature. I don't think she's going to get a whole lot of warm reception for that in Springfield. So I'm just not sure. And the question always is, people don't want to hear this, but can Chicago avoid bankruptcy? Because they're going to come up with some very severe cash flow problems. And yet at the same time, She also said in that speech that she's not going to wait until 2025 for a $15 an hour minimum wage. She wants to do that in 2021. So she's going to be increasing the costs on the Illinois businesses. They're looking to maybe raise property taxes. One wonders if you're trying to enhance the business community in the state, how do you do that by raising the labor costs prematurely early and by then raising the property taxes? I don't know what the answer is, but she certainly faces a huge problem, as do the citizens of Chicago.
Well, she does have a problem. She has a broad constituency, maybe too broad. You know, she beat in the runoff Tony Preckwinkle almost almost whatever I have to say, 75% of the vote to 25%. You could say that was 3-1. And, you know, that means you got a very big tent. You got a lot of progressives in there, and they're in the city council. You got a number of socialists in the city council. And, you know, the socialists, Terry, and the progressives don't necessarily focus on the issue you just raised. That is, how do you keep business? She doesn't want chase business away. When you go ahead and raise their cost mandate with something like a high minimum wage, $15 across the state of Illinois, you push it above the market wage. You drive business out. So that she has a lot of what you might call schizophrenia or tension there. Okay, I mean the big words we're talking about. You can cut costs to deal with that $838 million hole. You can cut costs, reform. You can cut spending. Another way of saying that. You can the T word is you can raise taxes. You can ask for somebody else to give you money. I don't see, as you say, I don't see J.B. Pritzker stepping up and say, here's $500 million, okay, from the other taxpayers in the state of Illinois. That's not going to happen. So she's looking at cuts. Oh, well, you know, the big word in there, which she mentioned but said she wouldn't do anything to it, is pensions. But by her words, she said, look, taxpayers, essentially, for every dollar you pay, 80 cents of that is personnel, that's pension, that's salaries, that's benefits, that's pensions. That was a very high number, but she said that, okay? She said that. And she's taken pensions off the table. She said, we're not getting, that's a promise we made. So you see the schizophrenia, Terry? It's not like she's unaware of this, the largeness of her problem caused by pensions. And she said the pensions, she essentially said, they were not too generous. They were not a problem. We just didn't put the money in. I think she's wrong. I think she needs to face up to the fact that those pensions, one reason why we didn't put the money in is the taxes would have been enormous. So they put it
Well,
up.
you know, this is the problem, and as I've told you, Jeff, privately, but our viewers don't know. I mean, I did a master's thesis 25 years ago on the coming collapse of publicly funded pensions. The problem was, and it's a problem around the nation, everyone wants to have big benefits, but they don't want to pay for them. And so we have people putting too little into their retirement funds for the amount of money they're going to be taking out. So we have these government officials, not just Lori Lightfoot, we have people across the board, across the United States saying, you know, pensions are a promise, that's fine, but where's the money going to come from? That's the problem, because those people that were putting in the money are getting 3 times, 2 or 3 or 4 times as much in benefits as what makes financial sense relative to the money that was put in. Let's take a listen before we get too far down the road here. One of the things that Mayor Lightfoot said she would look for as far as enhancing revenues is the idea of having a casino for Chicago. And of course, the Illinois legislature did in this past spring session and expand the number of casinos that are going to be out there, and Chicago is one of them. Here's what the mayor had to say.
And importantly, we are pursuing a Chicago casino that creates a dedicated revenue stream to pay for our pension costs. If we get the tax structure right, this will represent a structural solution to address long-term problems, not a one-time fix. Not only that, it will also create thousands of jobs, help fund the state's capital plan, and stop the flow of over $200 million in gaming revenue to Indiana.
Well, gaming is a bit of a solution for Chicago and possibly for other parts of the state of Illinois. And we talked about the major gaming expansion that was passed by Governor Pritzker and the Democrats, and maybe with some help from Republicans. Can't remember if they chimed in there as well, probably. But the short of it is, they made a major mistake. They set up a Chicago casino with several taxes that totaled 72% on the dollar, and most people put operating costs for a casino in Chicago at like 20 to 25 cents on the dollar. That gives you possibly a margin of 2 or 3 cents. That's not what casinos look for. If you're going to start a casino in Chicago, that's like what you do if you're running a grocery, okay? I mean, it was the biggest damn fool mistake anybody made. I'm sorry,
Jeff, no.
J.B. Pritzker's the governor. Somebody in the state should be responsible, J.B., and the buck stops there. You passed that legislation. You took the credit. Don't you have somebody, Dan Hines, one of your deputy governors, he's the fiscal guy? Couldn't he check the legislation and said, sweet Jesus, this isn't going to work? No, they passed it.
Well, just to repeat, I mean, what you were saying, so when we start looking at how much money we're taking out of the revenues from the casino, I think, didn't you say that you're over 100% when you start looking?
Well, you're a little bit under. 72 cents on the dollar for taxes, 20 to 25 cents for operating expenses. It leaves you a margin possibly of 2 to 3 cents.
Right,
and if you're off on the operating expenses, it's all over.
It's all over. So no one's going to invest. Right, no one's going to do that. And this is one of the things I sometimes wonder, why don't they just hire, or I am perplexed at how this happens. You would think there's a lot of smart people around. The governor is not a dumb person. The people that work for him are not dumb people. Right. But yet we have something come out, and you just think someone at a very fundamental level could have looked at that and said, ask someone in the gaming business, is this enough margin? Are you going to take this on? Will it be viable? They would have said no. They'd have said no in 10 seconds.
Some people say, okay, well, here, look, if everybody wants the credit for being a leader, if you're Governor Pritzker, big win, governor, big gaming, big legislation, get the credit, buck stops there. He's got to step up. He's not the guy to do the check, but he supposedly has hired the people who would check and tell him that. Speaker Madigan, he's so great, he doesn't have anybody who can find that out? I don't know. Senate President Cullerton, it's a Democratic-run state. I'm not picking at the Dems, but they got the control. Cullerton, Madigan, Pritzker, they couldn't figure this out? Okay, you got a few Republicans around. Durkin, you're the leader for the Republicans. Brady for the Senate, Durkin for the House. See what I mean, Terry? Who says this? I haven't heard anybody say this. Go after these people. Yeah, we'd like to have them on as guests too. So, but we're not going to give them a break. There are 5 people, 3 Democrats, two Republicans in the state, and then there are people in Chicago who could have noticed this, like Lightfoot and her people who work for her. Now, to her credit, she raised this issue before the consultants told her that she wasn't sure it was right. But okay, the short of it is now somebody either fixes it, I guess, in veto session. They're not going to call a special session. So that means the gaming revenue is going to be delayed because you can't move much forward on that until you fix that issue. You can't begin to, get a site where it's going to be and get people. Oh, but even if you can, Terry, so we don't do the whole show on this, what is that? $150, 200 million? How much could you possibly get in fiscal year 2020 to go toward, that $838 million hole? Probably can't even get that going by then. So that's fine. Okay, and then cannabis, marijuana, whatever you want to call it, that's going to do that? It'll give you something.
That'll give you something, but it's going to take years. You just don't start a business and
it's not the solution.
I say even if you get a thriving cannabis business going, which is an open question whether you can, the issue is still going to take years to develop. She's facing an $800 million shortfall in the near term, and as she said in her speech last night, going forward it gets worse. So there are systemic problems, which the mayor said, and I want to make sure, and I don't think you're blaming her. I'm not blaming her. She inherited this. This has been decades in the making, this problem with Chicago mismanagement. But you know, they're going to have to make some changes, and they're going to have to make them right away. And as the previous mayor, Rahm Emanuel, was famously known for saying, let's not let a crisis go to waste. So one of the things that, you know, maybe the legislature is going to say, hey, if you want us to bail us out, at what price? What are you going to do? And we're going to have some kind of an agreement where people are going to have to give up things they don't want to have to give up. One of the issues, and this might be tangential, I'm not even sure necessarily how it fits directly into Chicago, maybe with the totality of Cook County. But one of the issues we often hear from at least the conservative side, and you get bipartisan support actually on this, is the idea of consolidating government, levels of government, so that we get a bigger bang for the taxpayer's buck. And Illinois, as many people will know, has over 7,000 units of government, far more than any other state in the nation. And there's been a lot of people say, why don't we consolidate? One of those that have done it, and successfully so far, was DuPage County, right next to Cook County. Let's play a bite that we have from DuPage County Chairman Dan Cronin as he talked just about a year ago on the consolidation of just a part of the government of DuPage County and the savings that could be realized.
We created our Accountability, Consolidation, Transparency, or ACT initiative to seek opportunities to reduce the size, scope, and cost of local government. We have focused on service and cost sharing, collaboration, and working with our local and state partners to imagine new ways to deliver public services in the most efficient manner possible. Since then, we have saved taxpayers well over a projected $120 million, and that's been conservatively documented.
So, Jeff, there we go. The consolidation of county government, and as he said, look, they ended up saving some quite a lot of money. I don't want to use a quote because I don't have the exact number, but they have realized savings. And people say, look, we have some school districts, over 850 school districts around the state, as one example, and we have some of those districts where there's one school, and yet they have a superintendent making 6 figures in salary plus his pensions. So there are significant savings to be realized. And sometimes when we go back to what's happening in Chicago, I think rather than looking at each of these issues separately, little boxes, this is where maybe a Governor Pritzker can come in and go, look, we need to make some systemic changes. That's what the problems that got us here. And that's the problems, that's the solutions have to be systemic, to where we can give a little here, give a bit there, and come up just with a better way of doing government where we're not hemorrhaging spending. No matter how many times we raise taxes, we're still in a hole.
Well, we've got to avoid playing small ball. So the short thing on consolidation, Governor Rauner had a commission, they did a report, it went nowhere, okay? And that's number one. Number two, yeah, you can save some money, but when you start figuring out the political forces opposing you by cutting out or reducing significantly township government, big savings there because they do hardly anything of value. How to say it, hardly anything of value. But the costs are not that major when you look at the scheme of things. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but it's worth 2 minutes for us to discuss. We've just done it. They should do more. You could consolidate schools, you could cut out townships, you could save some bucks. But we're not doing a service to our viewers if we spend more time on that without saying this in 30 seconds, this in 30 seconds. Pensions are a major problem for the city of Chicago. She really didn't talk about that. They're not just unfunded, they're a tremendous drain. Here are the numbers, folks. Officially, Moody's says $42 billion for Chicago in unfunded pension, billion with a B. That cut doesn't even count CPS, which should be counted. That's another 26 billion. You're almost up to 70 billion. So please, let's not talking about some superintendent making 100,000. Yeah, he or she should.
Well, but you multiply this by over and over again.
No, even if you multiply it, Terry, you don't get to figures like $70 billion.
No, you don't.
So here's the short of it. If she wants to do something, you go to the Illinois legislature, you say, help us, we need to amend the Constitution so we can receive benefits. We cannot pay, $70 billion We can't raise taxes to do that. She's not done that yet, but that's or two, as you said, bankruptcy. If you go into bankruptcy, you can come out of it and you can reduce those pension benefits. Until that's structural, that's systemic. Now we've told the viewer something, but don't, it should be debated. There are other people who disagree. They can disagree, but at least we need to talk and give people the idea. Because, Terry, 1 year, that $838 million, that's just next year. What about the year after? The pensions are going to double in the payments from $1 billion to $2 billion. So we got, as she says, essentially, we got way more problems than just 2020. The budget for CPS now, she didn't even mention it, $7.7 billion, Terry. That's gone up like about 20% in 3 years.
Well, and the other thing is,
a few years ago, it was $6 billion.
People may not know from around the state, but the Chicago public teachers, as I understand it, are some of the highest paid in the nation, and now they're threatening to go on strike for more. Right.
Yeah. The city offered in this negotiation a 14% increase over 3 years, 2.8% a year, and the union has said that's not enough. They want way more. I mean, what are we talking about? She wants people to help and give them some help. And she wants to pay people who are making $73,000 median salary and boosting it significantly. Okay. And we should mention this whole thing of the teacher shortage. It's just stupid. There is no teacher shortage, folks. We had gone maybe 15 years ago or 20 years ago, we had class size of like 33 kids per class on average across the country. Now we're down to many places like 20 kids. So we got way more teachers per student than we used to. So what do you mean about, and you don't solve a shortage by passing a law that says everybody across Illinois.
I'm not going to buy into there's no teacher shortage. I want to be clear. Jeff Berkowitz is speaking for himself on no teacher shortage. That's his view. That's not the view of the Illinois Channel people. But on the idea of pensions, that is a math problem. That's not a subjective viewpoint. And, as Jeff mentioned, we are going to have it doesn't get any better down the road. It's not like if we get past this $800 million problem in the near term for Chicago, that suddenly it gets better after that. It does not get better after that. It gets worse after that. And I really don't know, short of taking on the pension issue, how you're ever going to get the amount of savings that you need. You cannot tax your way out of that. And I think the sooner everyone comes to some hard-nosed conclusions, the sooner we can start working on some kind of a real answer and not these artificial answers where we can throw a Band-Aid on just to get past this year and then hope for a miracle in the following year. This problem is coming down the road, and it's coming fast.
Well, it's a state issue as well, and they're just putting their heads in the sand.
Right.
I mean, if we have a $200 billion liability for the state of Illinois in unfunded pensions, and I don't hear the governor. He says he's got a task force that's studying this. They'll get back to this by the end of the year. When's the last time a task force solved any problems? Like 500 years ago? I mean, give me a break.
Well, look.
So we're not talking the big issues. We're talking the big issues. Terry Martin and Jeff Berkowitz are talking the big issues. But the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago, the politicians, the legislators, the executive, the judiciary, they're not talking the big issues. Just one thing to note, one thing that the mayor asked for is help from Springfield. And the governor said, yeah, we may pass a law that allows you, the city of Chicago, to tax professional services. And the mayor said she doesn't want to tax the little people who provide haircuts and automobile, repair services. She's talking about large law firms and consulting firms. Right. So we're going to tax them more. And she said one of the main things she doesn't want to do is drive business away or law firms away or consulting firms away. Well, every solution she has is about essentially taxing so-called wealthy people. As you know, the Marxists, this is the problem with Marxists. Eventually you run out of wealthy people to tax. I mean, there just are not that many. I'm being serious. So, and she also wants, I guess, authority to tax people who are leaving the city. They're dissatisfied. They're not, they're not buying into this offer. The city's offered them I don't know, you can stay here and pay higher taxes. They're leaving. They're selling their high-priced houses. And what do we have? We're now going to have an exit tax.
I think people are just looking for some magic bullet, that if they look hard enough, they're going to find some solution that never occurred to somebody. I just don't see that happening. And, keeping a system that is not going to be funded, can't be funded, doesn't help those who are going to be counting on those pensions. Because ultimately, what's going to happen is they're going to say, we're sending out IOUs. We owe you this money, and when the money comes in, if we ever find the coins to pay these IOUs, we'll send that check to you. But when these pension funds run dry and they're grossly underfunded, there's no magic dollars that are going to come to the city of Chicago so they can send the check out. And when you have the city, she's trying to run, as the mayor said, and we played the bite, for every dollar going in to run the city, 80 cents of it is being consumed by the salaries and pensions and benefits. So it leaves damn little for all the other things that people expect government to do, to run the parks, to have police protection, and the rest. So this is a problem. And people might go, well, they've been talking about that for a long time. Folks, we're coming down to brass tacks, as they say. We're running out of time. And we wish Mayor Lightfoot the best, but it's not about her. It's about the people that live there. It's about the firemen. It's about the policemen that count on these. And Jeff, we're either going to spend the entire time on this, or we got time for maybe one more bite that we can play.
I think we should. This is an important issue, so let's round it out on this. We'll come back to next week with some other topics. But this is really the important thing for the city of Chicago and for all the other viewers and voters around the state of Illinois. That's what we're talking about. The big aspects of the Illinois budget, the big aspects of the Chicago budget. Chicago is important because if it does well, it can help drive business around the state. If it does poorly, it can help drain business from around the state. And so one thing to keep in mind, Paul Vallis, smart guy, used to be CEO of the Chicago Public Schools, ran for governor, almost won, ran for mayor, not quite almost. But he said, remember this, what Lori Lightfoot was talking about yesterday is about a $10 billion budget, but she's leaving out the CPS budget, which is almost $8 billion, or the O'Hare Airport budget. When you throw in these other things, you're not talking 10 billion, you're talking 20 billion. I didn't say that, Paul Vallis did. Okay, so when you're looking for things to cut and reform, look broadly. Don't put CPS off on the side. The same people who are paying for the Chicago budget without CPS are paying for CPS. And the same people who are across the state of Illinois paying for the state budget, they're going to be on the lam for that $200 billion and unfunded liability.
That's the point I was going to make, and I've made this point, is like when we look at the problems with the state pensions, a lot of those taxpayers are also the people living in Cook County or in Chicago. It's not like there's a pool of Chicago taxpayers versus a pool of Illinois taxpayers. These same taxpayers are on the pool for all these unfunded.
We are running out of time. We are running out of time.
Right.
So we got to wrap this up in a few seconds,
right.
I think.
So I would just say we hopefully we can follow up with this and do it again. We are.
Remember to share the show, folks. Share the show.
Yeah, share the show. And Jeff, as always, good to talk to you, folks. As we tape this, have a good Labor Day, and we'll see you hopefully next week.